That night, I pulled every unpaid bill from a drawer I had avoided opening for a long time. One by one, the envelopes spread across our dining table until there was almost no empty space left. I stopped trying to count them. I simply looked at the table in silence, as if I were seeing the weight we had hidden for years for the very first time. The hardest part was never the numbers on those pages. It was realizing how often I had acted as though everything was fine. I realized we had spent too many years living beside quiet shame. It was never the debt itself that frightened us, but talking about it together. My name is Clara. The night we finally chose to be honest about our debt became the beginning of the biggest change our family had ever faced. The next morning, our home settled back into its familiar rhythm. I made breakfast, Armand got ready for work, and Mira happily talked about what she wanted to do at school. From the outside, nothing seemed different, but every payment notification on my phone quietly tightened the feeling in my chest. I stopped looking at our finance app for very long. I kept telling myself later, when I feel more ready. I quietly placed a few bills back into the drawer. I wasn't forgetting them, but seeing them made my thoughts feel heavier. One afternoon, Armand quietly asked, "Do we still have any bills due this week?" His voice was gentle, without pressure. I answered, "Yes. We'll look at it later." Even then, I had already known the answer long before he asked. That night, I closed the drawer once again. I was beginning to realize we weren't only hiding stacks of paper, but also the quiet worry growing between us. A few days later, I found the courage to open those documents again. This time, I didn't want to close them until I truly understood where we stood. I began writing every debt into a notebook. Numbers that had been scattered for so long finally came together on a single page. Seeing everything at once made it harder to take a full breath. The numbers hadn't grown, but I could no longer pretend everything was still under control. For a moment, I wanted to close the notebook again. Part of me wanted to return to believing that making the minimum payments meant everything was fine. The longer I looked at the list, the more a pattern began to appear. It wasn't only the debt that felt exhausting, but the fear that kept us from looking at it together. I thought about how many times we had postponed talking about money. There was always a reason to wait until later, even though later never seemed to arrive. That day, I realized something that was difficult to admit. Avoiding the problem hadn't made it smaller. It had only made it feel bigger inside my mind. I took a blank sheet of paper and began listing every debt from the smallest amount to the largest. For the first time, everything was laid out clearly in front of me. Seeing everything written down eased my fear more than I expected. I finally knew what we were facing instead of imagining it in my mind. At the top of the page, I wrote one simple sentence. We start with the smallest one. I still didn't know how long this journey would take, but at least we had one real first step. I read about the debt snowball method, not because it would erase our debt faster, but because each small win might help us keep going. I imagined what it would feel like to cross one debt off the list. The number might be small, but the courage afterward could feel much bigger. For the first time in a long while, I no longer looked at the list as the end of everything. I began to see it as a map toward the life we slowly wanted to build again. From the outside, our life still looked much the same. We laughed over dinner, took Mira to school, and followed the same routines as any other family. Whenever my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize, my heartbeat quietly picked up. I always wondered if it was another call about a bill we still hadn't settled. I found myself smiling a little more, so Armand wouldn't notice how worried I felt. I was afraid that if we both looked exhausted, our home would feel even heavier. Armand had also started coming home later than usual. It wasn't because he wanted to stay away, but because he was looking for extra opportunities to help us pay everything off sooner. We were both trying to protect each other in our own way. Somehow, that also meant we spoke less often about what we were truly feeling. Every night, I opened the list of our debts again. The numbers barely changed, but the tiredness inside me felt a little heavier each time. That was when something quietly became clear to me. Making the payments wasn't the hardest part. It was carrying all of it in silence every single day. One afternoon, Mira sat on the living room floor, quietly drawing with her colored pencils. I stayed beside her, sorting through a small stack of financial papers without saying much. She held up her drawing of a little house where 3 people stood together holding hands. Above them, she had drawn an oversized sun filling almost the entire sky. "Mom, this is our house," she said with a smile. "Everyone is smiling." I smiled and quietly nodded. Then Mira asked in her gentle voice, "Mom, our home is happy, isn't it?" I couldn't answer right away. Her simple question felt heavier than every number spread across the table. Looking at her drawing, I realized I had spent so much time trying to hide our problems. What my family needed was not a mother who always looked strong, but one willing to face reality with them. That night, I looked at our list of debts once again. For the first time, I wasn't ashamed to see it. I only felt it was time to stop hiding it. After Mira fell asleep that night, I looked at the drawing of our house again. I realized she had drawn our smiles, not the balance in our bank account. I slowly understood something that shame had hidden from me for a long time. Our debt affected our finances, but our silence had begun to affect our relationship. For too long, I believed hiding my worries was how I protected my family. Each time I stayed silent, I was quietly moving farther away from Armand. I opened the debt list again and looked at it differently. For the first time, it no longer felt like proof of failure, but the place where change could begin. I marked the smallest balance on the list. It was not because it mattered most, but because I wanted to build courage through small victories. That was when I truly understood what the debt snowball method meant. We were not only paying off debt, but also rebuilding hope with every small step forward. I finally understood that debt had never defined who we were. The future of our family would be shaped by our willingness to stop hiding and walk forward together. The following night, after Mira had fallen asleep, I asked Armand to sit with me at the dining table. Between us were only a warm cup of tea and the list of debts we had kept avoiding for so long. I took a long breath before I finally spoke. "I'm tired of pretending everything is fine." Armand looked at me for a long moment before answering. "I am too. I just didn't want to make you worry even more." I smiled a little and slowly shook my head. The hardest part hasn't been the debt. It's carrying it alone for so long. Armand reached for my hand without saying much. "Starting tonight, we stop hiding these numbers and face them together. We read through every debt one by one." There were no raised voices or blame, only two people choosing honesty instead of silence. When we finished talking, the amount we owed had not changed. Even so, my heart felt lighter because, for the first time, we had faced it together. The next morning, we printed our list of debts and placed it inside a folder made just for it. We stopped hiding it in a drawer as if the problem did not exist. We marked the smallest balance with a simple circle. It became the first step in a journey we knew would take time. Every weekend, we began setting aside 30 minutes to sit together. We were no longer talking only about money, but also about how each of us was feeling through it all. Little by little, conversations about money stopped feeling frightening. They became another way for us to care for each other instead of blaming each other. A few weeks later, we paid off one small debt. Crossing its name off the page felt like opening a window after a room had been closed for a long time. I smiled at Armand across the table. We knew the road ahead was still long, but for the first time we truly believed we could walk through it together. I realized our greatest victory was not the smaller amount of debt. It was no longer being afraid to speak honestly whenever money came up between us. We still have a few debts that we're paying off today, but we no longer let shame take up more space in our home than hope does. I still follow the debt snowball method. Every small balance we finish reminds me that meaningful change begins with the simplest step. I've learned that debt can weigh on our finances, but honesty, communication, and the courage to support each other have helped keep our family together through this season. If our story has helped you feel a little less alone, I'd be happy to have you join us at Clara's Family Journal. It's a place where we learn about family finances, healthy relationships, and small steps toward a calmer life, one story at a time. Now I'd love to hear your story. Talking about debt isn't easy, but honesty is often the first step toward healing. So have you ever felt trapped by a financial decision from your past?